The quantum resonance chamber hummed with an energy that was equal parts anticipation and barely controlled chaos. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter, her dark hair pulled back into a messy bun, augmented reality contacts flickering with a constellation of data streams that would make most neural interfaces look like child's play. 37 seconds to quantum cascade, announced Dr. Ravi Mehta from his station, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to bend and ripple with each touch. The U.S. Serendipity wasn't just a research vessel. It was a testament to humanity's most audacious scientific ambitions, a mobile laboratory that had become legendary for pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible. The crew was a carefully curated blend of the world's most brilliant and slightly unhinged researchers. There was Maya Chen, a computational xenolinguistics expert who could translate alien communication patterns faster than most people could order coffee. Beside her, Dr. Alejandro Vega monitored quantum stability, his cybernetic left eye constantly recalibrating complex algorithmic projections. What they were attempting was borderline insane, even by the standards of cutting-edge quantum communication research. The goal: to create a quantum communication relay that could potentially bridge impossible distances without the traditional limitations of light-speed communication. Standard scientific hubris suggested it was impossible. The Serendipity's crew saw that, as a challenge, Elena's personal history made her the perfect leader for such an audacious mission. Born to Argentine theoretical physicists and raised in a research facility that was more laboratory than home, she had spent her entire life dancing on the razor's edge between breakthrough and catastrophic failure. Her previous research had already rewritten 3 major physics textbooks and caused 3 separate international scientific controversies. The ship itself was a marvel of human engineering. Constructed as a joint international project, it represented humanity's collaborative spirit, a fusion of technologies from 17 different countries. Its quantum resonance chamber was a marvel of engineering that looked like something between a cathedral of science and a barely contained nuclear reactor. Quantum cascade initiating in 10. Ravi's voice cut through the ambient technological symphony. 9. 8. Maya leaned forward, her augmented hands hovering over communication diagnostic tools that looked more like musical instruments than scientific equipment. Quantum signature looking stable. Resonance parameters within acceptable deviation. Acceptable. Elena raised an eyebrow. We're not here for acceptable. We're here for impossible. The chamber began to pulse with an otherworldly blue light, quantum entanglement generators spinning up to velocities that defied classical understanding. Ribbons of energy began to weave through the chamber, creating intricate patterns that seemed to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. What none of them realized was that their quantum cascade was about to do something unprecedented. The communication relay they were attempting to create would not just bridge distances, it would breach barriers that were never meant to be crossed. Ravi's last countdown echoed through the chamber. 3, 2, 1. Quantum cascade. A sudden burst of impossible mathematics erupted across their screens. Algorithms that should have been theoretical began resolving into concrete data streams. Complex communication patterns that looked like nothing human began flooding their systems. The first indication that something extraordinary had happened came not from their scientific instruments, but from Maya's linguistic analysis tools. Alien communication protocols, not just detected, but fully resolved and partially decoded, began streaming across her holographic displays. Elena's augmented contacts exploded with data, her neural link struggling to process the sheer volume of information. Ravi, she said with an unsettling calmness that would become legendary, I think we just did something weird. Weird didn't begin to cover it. They had just accidentally tapped into the most secure communication network in the known galaxy, a network that belonged to a civilization that made human bureaucracy look like a children's tea party. And they were going to treat it exactly like the fascinating scientific anomaly it was. Someone, Elena announced to her crew, get more coffee. We're going to need it. Deep within the crystalline spires of the Xeraxian Central Communication Nexus, absolute pandemonium erupted in the most meticulously organized manner possible. The Thought Coordinator Supreme, a being known as Vexenar Krill, possessed 17 distinct brain lobes that could process information at speeds that would make human supercomputers weep with inadequacy. At this moment, those 17 lobes were engaged in what could only be described as a spectacular meltdown. Holographic displays flickered with impossible data streams. Communication protocols that should have been more secure than the fundamental laws of physics were now compromised by humans, not a massive invasion fleet, not a sophisticated cyber warfare team. Just a research vessel that seemed more interested in taking notes than conducting an actual invasion. Impossible. Vexenar clicked, his complex vocal apparatus producing a sound that was part language, part mathematical equation. Absolute impossibility. The communication hub around him was a marvel of alien engineering. Millions of quantum entanglement relays typically hummed with an efficiency that made human bureaucracies look like chaotic toddler birthday parties. Now those same relays were leaking information like a sieve, exposing layers of imperial communication that were never meant to be seen. Junior interference mitigation specialist Zorax watched in growing horror. His entire career had been dedicated to preventing exactly this type of scenario. The standard Xeraxian response to communication breaches involved a multi-layered approach of disinformation, strategic misdirection, and, if necessary, the complete sterilization of the offending civilization. But these humans, they weren't acting like any potential threat the Xeraxian Imperium had ever encountered. On the U.S. Serendipity, completely unaware of the galactic-level panic they were causing, the crew continued their research with the same enthusiasm they might apply to a particularly interesting geological survey. Dr. Maya Chen had already begun creating linguistic models of the accidentally intercepted communication patterns, treating the entire incident as the most fascinating academic exercise of her career. Back in the Xeraxian Communication Hub, Vexenar initiated the first of many emergency protocols. Layers of encryption began to spin up complex mathematical barriers that had historically been impenetrable. Yet somehow, the human researchers seemed to slip through these defenses with the same ease that a child might walk through an open door. "We're dealing with something unprecedented," Zorax reported, his translation devices struggling to convey the full depth of the situation. "The humans are not just accessing our communication networks. They're analyzing them, documenting them, as if we're some sort of academic research project." The truly terrifying part was the methodical nature of the human intrusion. Most species would have immediately attempted to weaponize such a massive communication breach. The humans were writing footnotes. Deep within the Imperial archives, ancient communication protocols began to unravel. Layers of bureaucratic secrecy that had been maintained for millennia started to come apart, not through violent hacking, but through a systematic, almost gentle deconstruction of their communication infrastructure. Vexenar's 17 brain lobes began to develop what could only be described as a collective existential crisis. The Xeraxian Imperium had subjugated countless civilizations, crushed rebellions before they could even spark, and maintained absolute control through a communication network that was considered more impenetrable than the core of a neutron star. And now, a single human research vessel was systematically unraveling that entire system, completely by accident. The emergency communication to Earth was drafted with a level of diplomatic complexity that would make human ambassadors weep. It was a masterpiece of alien bureaucratic language, simultaneously a threat, a request for clarification, and a cry for help. "Attention human research vessel," the message began, its translation protocols working overtime to convey the proper level of imperial displeasure. "Your unauthorized access to secured imperial communication networks represents a violation of." Maya Chen would later describe the intercepted message as cute in her research notes. The Xeraxian diplomatic corps would spend decades trying to recover from that single descriptor. As panic spread through the higher echelons of the Xeraxian imperial structure, one fundamental truth became increasingly clear. Humanity had accidentally discovered something far more powerful than any weapon. They had discovered how to turn bureaucratic curiosity into a form of unintentional galactic disruption. And they were just getting started. Dr. Ravi Mehta's personal research terminal looked like a battlefield of information. Holographic displays cascaded with alien communication protocols, each layer revealing more complexity than the last. What had started as an accidental quantum communication breach was rapidly transforming into the most significant xenolinguistic and communication systems research in human history. "This is beyond fascinating," he muttered, taking a massive bite of a slightly stale protein bar. "It's a complete communication ecosystem, unlike anything we've ever seen." The research team had quickly established a makeshift xenocommunication analysis center within the Serendipity's main laboratory. What looked like chaos to an outside observer was actually a meticulously organized research environment. Maya Chen had already developed 3 new linguistic algorithms just to begin parsing the intercepted Xeraxian communication networks. Unbeknownst to the researchers, their academic dissection was causing ripples far beyond their immediate understanding. The Xeraxian communication infrastructure was more than just a network. It was the circulatory system of their entire imperial structure. Every protocol, every encrypted channel, every bureaucratic communication thread was a carefully maintained mechanism of control. And the humans were treating it like an interesting puzzle. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a massive holographic display, her augmented reality contacts parsing information at speeds that would make most supercomputers look like abacuses. "Look at this," she called to her team. "Their communication hierarchies are beautifully complex, but they've got fundamental structural vulnerabilities that they've never even considered." What the Xeraxians didn't realize was that humans approached complex systems with a unique combination of scientific curiosity and complete disregard for established limitations. Where alien civilizations saw impenetrable security, humans saw an intellectual challenge. On a small research station orbiting a distant moon, a group of subjected Xeraxian client species intercepted the first of the human research papers. The document, with its dry academic title, Quantum Communication Breach, Structural Analysis of Interstellar Communication Protocols, would become the most dangerous piece of information in the galaxy. The paper didn't just expose vulnerabilities. It methodically, clinically, and almost compassionately broke down the entire communication infrastructure of the Xeraxian Imperium. Each section was annotated with suggested improvements, alternative communication models, and potential restructuring methodologies. It was an invasion conducted entirely through footnotes and academic citations. Zorax, the Xeraxian interference mitigation specialist, watched in growing horror as the human research began to circulate. The first translation of the academic paper reached the subjugated species within the Xeraxian Imperium, and something extraordinary began to happen. Rebellion, when it came, was not violent. It was academic. Client species began submitting formal research queries. They used the language and methodology of the human researchers, polite, systematic, ruthlessly logical. Each query was a surgical strike against the imperial communication infrastructure, disguised as an innocent request for clarification. "They're using our own bureaucratic systems against us," Zorax realized, his multiple sensory organs quivering with a combination of terror and grudging respect. The human researchers, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the revolution they were sparking. Dr. Mehta was more concerned with developing a new communication analysis algorithm than understanding the geopolitical implications of their research. "Elena," he called out, "I think I've found a way to map their communication quantum signatures that could revolutionize our understanding of." "Coffee," Elena interrupted, not looking up from her research. "We need more coffee." Their research vessel, the Serendipity, had become the most dangerous weapon in galactic history, and it was armed with nothing more than curiosity, academic rigor, and a seemingly endless supply of caffeine. The Xeraxian Imperium was about to learn a fundamental truth about humanity. Their most dangerous quality was not their military might, their technological innovation, or their adaptability. It was their ability to turn any system, no matter how complex, into an academic research project. And they were just getting started. The Rim Collective, a loose federation of species trapped under Xeraxian imperial control, had never considered themselves revolutionaries. They were survivors, pragmatists who had learned to exist within the suffocating bureaucracy of the Xeraxian Imperium for generations. That changed with a single academic paper that spread through underground communication networks like wildfire. Dr. Meta's research document arrived through a complex chain of encrypted transmissions, passed from one oppressed civilization to another. It wasn't a call to arms. It was something far more dangerous, a systematic deconstruction of imperial communication systems that revealed every weakness with clinical precision. On the methane-rich world of Krelax, a communication technician named Zorn studied the human research with trembling sensory tendrils. The document wasn't just a technical analysis. It was a blueprint for resistance. Each footnote was a potential lever of change, each citation a potential weapon more powerful than any plasma cannon. The human researchers remained completely oblivious to the revolution they were sparking. Aboard the Serendipity, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was more concerned with a particularly challenging quantum entanglement problem. "Ravi," she called out, barely looking up from her holographic displays. "I need you to verify these communication cascade algorithms. Something doesn't quite add up." Dr. Meta, munching on his third protein bar of the day, responded with the enthusiasm of someone solving an interesting but ultimately mundane puzzle. "Give me 15 minutes. I'm seeing some fascinating resonance patterns in the quantum communication spectrum." What they didn't realize was that their fascinating puzzle was systematically dismantling a 1,000-year-old imperial system. The Xeraxian response was predictably bureaucratic. Layers of communication restrictions began to spin up, complex algorithmic barriers designed to prevent the spread of the human research. But each new restriction only made the information more valuable, more sought after. On the mining colonies of the Outer Rim, workers began to use the humans' research methodology to challenge their imperial overseers. Formal communication requests, written in the exact linguistic and technical style of the human academic paper, became a form of quiet rebellion. Each request was a surgical strike, polite, precise, and absolutely devastating. Maya Chen, the team's xenolinguistics expert, had inadvertently created something far more powerful than a translation algorithm. Her communication analysis tools were being adapted by subjugated species to understand and challenge their own systemic oppression. "It's fascinating," she told Elena during a late-night research session, "how communication protocols can reveal the fundamental power structures of a civilization." Elena nodded, more focused on her quantum calculations than the full implications of Maya's observation. More coffee. The Xeraxian Interference Mitigation Division, led by Zorax, watched in growing horror as their carefully constructed imperial communication network began to unravel. It wasn't a violent rebellion. It was something far more terrifying. A systematic, bureaucratic dismantling of their entire system of control. On the planet Nexus Prime, the central administrative hub of the Xeraxian Imperium, communication channels began to show unprecedented levels of stress. Queries that would have once been summarily dismissed were now requiring detailed responses. Each response created more questions, more challenges, more opportunities for resistance. The human researchers had discovered something fundamental about complex systems. True vulnerability lies not in physical weakness, but in the assumptions that maintain that system. Dr. Meta's latest research tool, a quantum communication analysis algorithm he developed almost as an afterthought, became the most dangerous piece of technology in the known galaxy. It wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror reflecting the fundamental weaknesses of an entire imperial communication infrastructure. Zorn, the communication technician on Krelax, understood something the Xeraxian leadership had forgotten. Information, when properly analyzed and distributed, was the most powerful force in the universe. The revolution was happening not with weapons, but with footnotes, citations, and an absolutely relentless commitment to understanding complex systems. And the humans responsible were still mostly concerned with getting another cup of coffee. The diplomatic shuttle arrived at Earth's orbital reception station, with all the subtlety of a neutron star collapsing. Its design was a nightmare of angular precision, a vessel that looked like it had been constructed by someone who understood geometry, but had never encountered the concept of aesthetic comfort. Ambassador Klovex of the Zeraxian High Diplomatic Corps represented the pinnacle of their species' bureaucratic evolution. Each of their 4 manipulative appendages could independently process complex negotiation algorithms. Their neural network contained redundancies that would make human computer engineers weep with joy. And right now, those neural networks were engaged in what could only be described as a high-stakes intellectual panic. The human reception was nothing like what any galactic species would consider a proper diplomatic encounter. Dr. Elena Rodriguez showed up wearing what could generously be described as business-casual laboratory wear, a wrinkled blazer over a t-shirt with a quantum mechanics joke that only 3 people in the universe would understand. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was drinking what was quite possibly her 7th cup of coffee that morning. "Welcome to Earth," she said, extending a hand in a gesture that was simultaneously professional and completely informal. "I hope you don't mind if we conduct this meeting in the research cafeteria. Best coffee in the solar system." Klovex's translation devices worked overtime. The diplomatic protocols they had prepared over months of careful preparation seemed to disintegrate the moment they entered the room. This was not the formal, rigid encounter they had anticipated. This was something else entirely. The cafeteria was a chaos of scientific equipment, half-eaten protein bars, and researchers who looked like they had forgotten the concept of sleep weeks ago. Holographic displays flickered with incomprehensible data streams. A robot was making what appeared to be an extremely precise cup of espresso. "We need to discuss the unauthorized access to Imperial communication networks," Klovex began, their voice a precise mathematical cadence. Dr. Ravi Mehta looked up from a complex quantum algorithm he was debugging. "Oh, right. That quantum communication thing. Fascinating research opportunity. By the way, would you like to see our preliminary findings?" What followed was possibly the most bizarre diplomatic encounter in galactic history. The Zeraxian delegation had prepared for multiple scenarios: aggressive negotiation, defensive posturing, potential military confrontation. They had not prepared for a 4-hour academic workshop where the humans treated the entire incident as an interesting technical problem. Maya Chen joined the meeting, bringing with her a comprehensive linguistic analysis of Zeraxian communication protocols. Her presentation was so detailed, so meticulously researched, that Klovex found themselves taking notes. "We've identified some fascinating communication redundancies in your network," Maya explained, her augmented reality display showing complex communication flowcharts. "Would you be interested in our optimization suggestions?" The Zeraxian delegation's collective neural networks were experiencing what could only be described as an existential malfunction. This was not how first contact negotiations were supposed to proceed. There were no threats, no posturing, just pure, unbridled scientific curiosity. As the meeting progressed, the humans began treating the Zeraxian diplomatic team less like potential galactic threats and more like interesting research subjects. They asked questions about communication biology, neural network redundancies, and the fundamental principles of their bureaucratic structures. Klovex realized with growing horror that they were no longer conducting a diplomatic negotiation. They were participating in an academic research project. "We should discuss compensation," the Zeraxian ambassador attempted, trying to regain some semblance of diplomatic control. Elena Rodriguez looked up from her coffee. "Compensation? Oh, we're thinking of publishing our findings. Open source, of course. Would you like to be a co-author?" The diplomatic mission was rapidly becoming an academic collaboration. By the time the Zeraxian delegation left Earth's orbital station, they were more confused than when they had arrived. They had come prepared for conflict, confrontation, or at the very least, a formal diplomatic incident. Instead, they had participated in what was essentially a very intense research seminar. Humanity had just conducted diplomacy in a way no species in galactic history had ever conceived possible, and they were still mostly concerned with getting another cup of coffee. Deep within the fractal communication networks of the Ziraxian Imperium, something unprecedented was happening. It wasn't a collapse. It was a metamorphosis. Dr. Alejandro Vega, the Serendipity's systems integration specialist, had developed a quantum communication analysis tool that was less a piece of software and more a living, breathing information ecosystem. What had begun as a research project was now systematically revealing the intricate weaknesses of an entire galactic civilization's infrastructure. On the planet Nexus Prime, the administrative heart of the Ziraxian Imperium, senior bureaucrats watched in growing terror as their communication systems began to evolve in ways they had never anticipated. Each query, each piece of intercepted human research, was like a genetic mutation in their institutional DNA. Zorax, the former interference mitigation specialist, now found himself in a position he could never have imagined. Where once he had been a guardian of Imperial communication protocols, he was now becoming something of a reluctant translator between the old system and the emerging new order. The human researchers weren't conducting an invasion. They were performing an involuntary system audit. "Look at this," Dr. Vega muttered, his cybernetic eye scanning through layers of intercepted communication protocols. Their entire administrative structure is basically a recursive bureaucratic algorithm with zero external input mechanisms. Maya Chen leaned over his shoulder, her augmented hands dancing across holographic displays. "It's not just inefficient, it's actively preventing systemic evolution." What they didn't realize was that their casual observation was tantamount to a surgical strike against the entire Imperial infrastructure. On the Outer Rim colonies, subject species began to weaponize the humans' research methodology. Formal communication requests became instruments of subtle rebellion. Each query was crafted with the precise linguistic and technical approach outlined in the human academic papers: polite, detailed, and absolutely devastating. The Ziraxian communication network had always been their greatest strength. Now it was becoming their most significant vulnerability. Quantum communication relays that had been considered impenetrable began to show fractures. Not violent breaches, but subtle realignments that exposed fundamental structural weaknesses. It was as if the entire Imperial communication infrastructure was being gently, methodically taken apart and examined. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was more concerned with her morning coffee than the galactic scale transformation happening as a result of their research. "Ravi," she called out, "we're running low on those Brazilian roast beans. Can you restock?" Dr. Mehta, buried in a complex quantum algorithm, mumbled something that might have been an affirmative response. The transformation was happening at multiple levels simultaneously. Communication protocols were being rewritten. Administrative hierarchies were being challenged. Entire species were reassessing their place in the galactic power structure. And the humans responsible were treating the entire process like a mildly interesting research project. Zorax discovered something truly terrifying. The human research wasn't just exposing weaknesses in the Ziraxian system. It was providing a blueprint for a completely new form of galactic governance. Each academic paper was a potential constitution, each footnote a potential law. The most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't a weapon at all. It was a methodology. On the research vessel Serendipity, the team continued their work with the same casual intensity they might apply to solving a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. Holographic displays danced with complex communication algorithms. Quantum entanglement generators hummed with barely contained potential. "I think I found something interesting," Dr. Vega announced, not looking up from his research. Elena responded, more focused on her coffee preparation. "Their entire administrative communication structure is basically a self-defeating recursive loop," Vega continued. "It's like they've designed a system that's programmed to prevent its own evolution." Maya Chen's linguistic analysis tools were already breaking down the implications. What had started as a quantum communication research project was rapidly becoming a comprehensive deconstruction of an entire civilization's communication infrastructure. The Xeraxian Imperium was about to learn a fundamental truth about humanity. Their most dangerous quality was not military might, technological innovation, or even adaptability. It was their ability to turn any complex system into an academic research project. And they were just getting started. The Grand Chamber of Interstellar Arbitration was a monument to architectural impossibility. Suspended in a pocket of space-time that defied conventional physics, it was neutral ground where civilizations could negotiate without the burden of traditional power dynamics. Today, it would witness something unprecedented in galactic history. The Xeraxian delegation arrived first, a crystalline formation of bureaucratic perfection, each member a living embodiment of computational precision. They were led by High Coordinator Ixtal, a being whose neural network represented the accumulated administrative wisdom of 7 generations. The human delegation consisted of 5 individuals who looked like they had accidentally wandered into the most important meeting in galactic history. Dr. Elena Rodriguez wore what appeared to be the same blazer she'd worn during their previous encounter, now sporting a small coffee stain that she seemed entirely unaware of. Dr. Ravi Mehta had brought an entire portable quantum analysis station, which he was still calibrating as they entered the chamber. Maya Chen was reviewing linguistic translation matrices on her augmented reality interface, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. Zorax, the former interference mitigation specialist who had become something of a bridge between human researchers and Xeraxian leadership, took his position as intermediary with a mixture of professional duty and barely contained intellectual excitement. "We are here," Ixtal began, their communication translation devices humming with multi-layered semantic complexity, to discuss the unprecedented breach of Imperial communication infrastructure. Elena looked up from adjusting her coffee thermos. "Oh, right. That quantum communication thing." The entire chamber seemed to collectively hold its breath. What followed was less a negotiation and more an extraordinarily complex academic workshop. The humans didn't present demands or make threats. Instead, they systematically walked the Xeraxian delegation through the vulnerabilities they had discovered in the Imperial communication network. Each revelation was accompanied by a meticulously prepared solution. Your communication redundancy protocols create recursive feedback loops that actually inhibit systemic adaptation. Dr. Vega explained, holographic models spinning between them. "We've developed a potential restructuring methodology that could increase your communication efficiency by approximately 227%. Ixtal's neural networks were experiencing what could only be described as an existential recalibration. The true power of the human approach became evident. They weren't conquering through force or diplomacy. They were offering a comprehensive system upgrade. Zorax watched in amazement as the most complex administrative system in galactic history was being reimagined, not as a conquest, but as an optimization problem. Maya Chen's linguistic analysis revealed something even more profound. The communication protocols they were proposing weren't just technically superior. They were fundamentally more inclusive. Species that had been marginalized under the Xeraxian system would now have clear, transparent communication channels. "We're not looking to replace your system," Elena said, taking a dramatic sip of coffee. "We're offering to help you evolve it." The negotiations continued for what seemed like standard galactic time, which, depending on the species and dimensional reference, could mean anything from several hours to multiple subjective centuries. What emerged was not a surrender, but a transformation. The Xeraxian Imperium would remain, but fundamentally change. Their communication infrastructure would become an open, adaptive system. Subject species would have unprecedented levels of administrative participation. What had been a rigid, hierarchical empire was becoming something entirely new. Ixtal realized something fundamental. The humans weren't conquerors. They were problem solvers. As the final agreements were being drafted, Dr. Mehta was more concerned with a quantum entanglement calculation he was working on. Dr. Rodriguez was wondering if the arbitration chamber had decent coffee. The most significant restructuring of galactic political systems in known history was essentially a side effect of a research project. When the final documents were signed, or more accurately, quantum encrypted and distributed across multiple communication networks, there was no grand ceremony, no dramatic speeches. Elena looked at Ixtal. Coffee? And just like that, humanity had accidentally redesigned a galactic civilization. Because sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is simply a fresh perspective and an exceptionally good cup of coffee. 5 standard galactic cycles after the Great Transformation, the universe had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The research vessel Serendipity had become something of a legend, not as a military vessel, not as a diplomatic mission, but as the most consequential academic research project in recorded history. Museums across multiple star systems displayed holographic recreations of its quantum communication laboratory, complete with coffee stains and half-eaten protein bars. Dr. Elena Rodriguez found herself in the most unexpected position of her career. She was now the primary consultant for interspecies communication development, a role she approached with the same casual intensity she once reserved for complex quantum research. "It's really just a matter of communication," she would tell bewildered diplomatic delegations, usually while brewing an elaborate coffee blend she'd collected from various planetary colonies. "Most conflicts are just really complicated misunderstandings." The galactic communication network that emerged from their research was unlike anything previously conceived. It was adaptive, transparent, and fundamentally designed to facilitate understanding rather than control. Subject species that had been marginalized for millennia now found themselves with unprecedented access to administrative channels. Zorax, the former Zoraxian interference mitigation specialist, had become a bridge between civilizations. His role was part diplomat, part cultural translator, part systems analyst. The neural network that had once been designed to suppress communication was now dedicated to facilitating it. On the research station orbiting what was once the central administrative hub of the Zoraxian Imperium, a new kind of academic institution had emerged. The Interstellar Communication and Systemic Development Institute was a melting pot of species, research methodologies, and intellectual curiosity. Dr. Ravi Mehta had discovered something far more interesting than quantum communication protocols: the complex social algorithms that emerged when diverse species were given genuine opportunities to communicate. "It's not about the technology," he would explain to research students from a dozen different planetary systems. "It's about creating systems that allow for genuine understanding." Maya Chen's linguistic analysis tools had evolved into something far beyond their original purpose. They were now the primary method by which newly contacted species could develop communication frameworks that respected their unique cognitive and linguistic structures. The most surprising outcome was how little actually changed, and how much changed simultaneously. Planetary governments still existed. Cultural identities remained intact, but the fundamental way these societies interacted had been reimagined. Communication was no longer a tool of control, but a method of mutual understanding. Dr. Alejandro Vega had developed a quantum communication matrix that allowed species to share experiences in ways that transcended traditional language barriers. It wasn't translation. It was genuine understanding. The Serendipity itself had been preserved, not as a museum piece, but as a working research vessel. Its quantum communication laboratory was now a living testament to the power of scientific curiosity. Occasionally, the original research team would reunite. These meetings were less formal conferences and more like reunions of old friends who had accidentally changed the course of galactic history. "Remember when we were just trying to solve that quantum entanglement problem?" Elena would ask, brewing an impossibly complex coffee blend that incorporated beans from 7 different planetary systems. Ravi would laugh. Maya would pull up holographic research data. Alejandro would be calibrating some new communication analysis tool. They had become accidental architects of a new galactic paradigm. and they were still primarily concerned with interesting research problems and good coffee. The Xerexian Imperium no longer existed in its original form, but it hadn't been destroyed. It had evolved. Ixtal, the former High Coordinator who had been part of the final negotiations, now led the Interstellar Communication and Systemic Development Institute. Their neural networks, once dedicated to maintaining a rigid imperial structure, now explored the infinite possibilities of genuine interspecies collaboration. Historians would debate for generations how a single research vessel had fundamentally transformed galactic civilization. Academic papers would be written. Conferences would be held. But the truth was beautifully simple. A group of researchers had approached a complex problem with nothing more than scientific curiosity, a commitment to understanding, and a truly exceptional coffee brewing technique. And in doing so, they had changed everything. Just another Tuesday in human research.